Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to our next webinar in the webinar series called Talking to Lawmakers. Whether you have talked to lawmakers before and this is just a good refresher for you to communicate to fellow advocates that you might be leading or introducing to this work, or if you are brand new, I hope you get something out of this webinar today. So to give you a little bit of structure, we're going to start with just a quick overview of who we are and what we do to make sure everyone knows what's going on if they are new. And then we're going to have Representative Salahuddin from District 48 join us around 12:45. I'll do some questions with him and then he'll do an audience Q&A with you guys. So start thinking of questions that you want to ask a lawmaker right at the source right now. And then we'll finish up with some information about districts, regions, regional captains, and how that pertains to talking to your lawmakers. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So first, we're going to start with our land acknowledgement. Inspire Washington acknowledges that we and our cultural partners statewide are on the homelands of Native peoples who have lived in this region from time immemorial. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. We also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where all of our cultural partners live and work. Currently, there are 42 tribes, 29 of which are federally recognized, that share traditional homelands and waterways in what is now Washington state. Some of these nations and confederacies that represent multiple tribes and bands, and we acknowledge all of them here at Inspire Washington. Inspire Washington also expresses its deepest respect for and gratitude towards these original and current caretakers and culture bearers of the region. As a cultural sector, we acknowledge our responsibility to establish and maintain relationships with these tribes and Native peoples in support of tribal sovereignty and the inclusion of their voices in teaching art, heritage, natural science, and providing cultural programming. We pledge that our relationships will consist of mutual trust, respect, and reciprocity. I'm Madeline Dalton. I'm the outreach coordinator for Inspire Washington, and I am from what is now called Newcastle, Washington, which is within the land of the Duwamish tribe in the interconnected lands of the Coast Salish people. So I'm going to give you just a second to read our mission statement up on the screen, and then we'll talk a little bit about who we are and what we do. So today's webinar is a great example of some of the things you see in this mission statement. We do a lot of education programs, and this is one of them, public informational events to talk about what's going on. We do our Cultural Futures Tour every spring where we talk about grant opportunities, give you information about how the legislative session works, what just happened in the legislative session, how can you get funding, and how can you keep looking towards your cultural future. And here's another one. This is an education opportunity for advocates to learn how to advocate. And of course, our mission statement also mentions advocacy. So this is a great way for you to experience what we do here at Inspire Washington. We are a mighty team of three. We have our executive director, Manny, and then we have our deputy director, Jesse, who is on the call today. And then there's me. I'm the outreach coordinator, Madeline. And my role here is primarily to corral a whole bunch of you guys, hundreds of you from across the state, from Grays Harbor to Pullman, to talk to your lawmakers every winter during the legislative session. I also work with advocates on every other level of government. So for example, during the Doors Open process a couple of years ago, I helped to corral our advocates to talk to their city council. But my biggest event every year is AHS Week, and that's what all of these webinars are focused on. Who do we support? So when we say that we support the cultural sector, this is who we mean: science, heritage, and arts. So for science, that includes nature conservancies, fish hatcheries, zoos, science and innovation centers, aquariums, and so many more. If you're a science person, go ahead and raise your Zoom hand. If you're on camera, you can give a wave to the crowd. You can also put that in the chat if you'd like. I'd love to see who we have here today and which areas of the sector are being represented.
They're done by the pier, I believe.
I'm going to make sure everyone's muted. Perfect. Next, we have heritage folks. So that includes historical and cultural heritage sites, humanities, museums, cultural heritage festivals, etc. Do we have any heritage folks in the house today? You can wave with your little Zoom hand on screen, put it in the chat. Okay, now see, I think we mostly have arts folks here today. So that would be the rest of you arts folks. This includes all the areas of performing and visual art that you can think of, but also non-commercial radio, spoken word, literature, film. So if you're an arts person, go ahead and raise your Zoom hand, wave, put it in the chat. Awesome. Good to see. We love to try to have as many folks represented as possible, but typically we do have lean a little bit more arts heavy just because there are so many different kinds of art all around our state. All right, so just to make sure we're all on the same page about why we're having this webinar, what we're talking about, I just want to give a quick overview of what Arts, Heritage, and Science Week is. So this is our annual event every February where we go to Olympia or virtual Olympia to talk to our lawmakers. So there are 49 legislative districts in the state, and advocates from all 49 districts will come together during this event. During the full week, we host virtual meetings with our lawmakers. And then on the Wednesday of AHS week, that's when we have our in-person meetings with lawmakers. You can do both or one or the other. It's totally up to you. So now is a good time to save the date, February 2nd through 6th, with our in-person day on February 4th. We will have a link to drop in the chat later. I'm just now realizing that I have my script on my iPad and not sharing screen. So we might have to do a little like unshare and reshare just to get the link all set up, or Jesse can snag it for me. But it'll all
Yes, I
work
can
well.
share links.
Perfect. Thank you. Jesse, I'm going to call it out now for the next slide. If you can pull up the Washington legislature roster and drop that in the chat, that would be awesome. All right, so next I want to talk about the Washington legislature roster, and I'm going to see if PowerPoint will let me click on the link. I don't think it will. So I'm going to stop my sharing real quick, pull this up, and then share this tool with you guys so you can watch me use it in an interactive way. This is one of our favorite tools that we use during honestly year round to keep track of who the lawmakers are, who are their legislative aides, and how do we talk to them. So last month, I know I shared, or Jesse shared during the webinar, because I was at jury duty, which thank God that's over. Um, last month, we talked about the District Finder app where you can put your address in and figure out where you live and where that all works in the state. But now I want to show you how you can use that information about which district you live in to talk to your lawmakers. So I'm going to share screen again here. Can everyone see? All right, I'm going to take that as a yes. Amazing. So this is one of my favorite tools right here. You can organize it by alphabetical order. You can organize it by district number. That's usually the easiest way for me to do it. And it'll show your 3 lawmakers in that district. It'll show which position they're in, which I don't think is super important, but then their room number, which is great for AHS Week, so you know where to go and where to find them, their email address, and then their legislative assistant and their legislative assistant email. I think that's the most important part of this, is because that's who you're going to be emailing, and we're going to talk a lot about talking to staffers in a second. And if you get confused about which chamber a lawmaker is from, we have House and Senate, H for House, S for Senate, right here. This tool is updated pretty consistently by the state so that if there's some turnover in a lawmaker's office, you'll actually know who to reach out to, which is great. The staffer world has a very high turnover rate, as I'm sure you can imagine. So it's nice to have this tool to make sure that you know what's going on. But every year we also do submit to our district leaders a district team sheet that has pictures for every single lawmaker, as well as their contact information, the legislative aides contact information, and their committee assignments. So if you are a district leader or regional captain, you'll have 2 different ways to look at that information, versus if you are an everyday advocate, you'll just have the roster to look at. I also bring this up because we want to emphasize how important it is to talk to your lawmakers year round. This is a year-round endeavor. AHS Week is awesome. It's a great touch point. It could be a great introduction for a lawmaker that you don't know, or maybe they're new to the legislature, but we really want to stress that this is an ongoing year-round conversation. A conversation that happens during AHS Week could launch you into a follow-up meeting in the spring, and then you could invite them to a performance in the summer, and then in the fall you want to talk to them pre-legislative session, and that cycle will continue and continue. And using that roster is a great way to keep tabs on who your lawmaker is and how to talk to them. Oh, and of course, it took me to the beginning. All right, so let's push forward to talking about legislative aides. These are the unsung heroes of the legislature. First of all, they're the keepers of your lawmaker's calendar. So there's no way you'll be able to get a meeting with your lawmaker on the books if you do not CC your lawmaker's aide. They're going to be the ones doing all of that scheduling work. They also do really detail-oriented work when it comes to the laws themselves and the bills that come across their desk. Lawmakers are human beings, And there are so many bills in any given session that they, as one singular person each, cannot keep them all straight. And that is not a diss on lawmakers whatsoever. It is simply human. It is simply how this works. And it's why they have a staff. But their staff can kind of divide and conquer based on different issues and get really detailed about specific pieces of legislation. So when it's time to vote on something or time for a lawmaker to get a recap on what something means, their staffer is there to provide them with that information. So I say all of this because it's possible that during AHS week, you might not get to meet with your lawmaker. And first, I just want to acknowledge I know how disappointing this can be and this can feel because it feels like you're meeting with like a local celebrity or you're getting a peek behind the curtain to the government process when you get to meet with your lawmaker themselves. That being said, it doesn't mean that your meeting will be any less productive or effective because you're meeting with a staffer in place of a lawmaker. In fact, sometimes it can give you an edge in a different way that's really helpful to your cause. So, one thing that happens when you meet with a lawmaker's staffer is that if there's a bill that they don't know about, they're going to be really motivated to go back, learn about this bill, and shoot you a follow up email. They often will initiate this process themselves, and you won't even have to ask. You just have to make sure that they have your email address so that this happens. But they're really enthusiastic about doing this work. You can come in to talk about a bill and have a really specific question about how it works, and they might know better than your lawmaker would about this one specific thing. So let's say you read the bill language before you showed up, and you said, I don't really understand how the funding from this will go to this. Can you explain that? And they might have an answer. And if they don't have an answer, they'll go home and they'll look at it, and then they'll have that ongoing conversation with you. This is a great way to, one, really make your case. Two, have a really sustained relationship with that lawmaker's office. And three, to get really detail-oriented information. So all this to say, if you meet with a staffer, it is not the end of the world. It's actually a really good thing. And you want to CC your legislative aides every single time you reach out to them. Any questions so far about staffers, AHS week, any of that stuff before I push on? No? All right, let's keep going. All right, so now I want to talk about how exactly to talk to your lawmaker. The first thing I urge you to remember is that lawmakers are people too. I know sometimes we can forget that when we think about politics or we just think about how distant they are from our everyday lives, but this is representative government. So your lawmakers are there to vote on your interests as the constituent, not their own personal feelings. And they are people, and they're going to need to hear stories and be persuaded by other people in order to figure out what their constituents need and how they feel. So we like to remind people to open and close with something a little bit more personal in their meeting. During AHS week, you're going to get a 15-minute meeting with your lawmaker. So it's really tight, but you're going to want to start by asking them something personal. So for example, it could be, which cultural events do you like attending the most? Do they currently practice cultural work in any way, whether it's a hobby or they actually kind of do it as a semi-pro endeavor? For example, Senator Jamie Peterson sings in the Seattle Men's Chorus, which is really cool. I've actually seen him in a concert and I forgot that he did it. And I was like, no way, that's Senator Peterson on stage. How cool is that? So it could be something like that, or maybe their kid plays violin, or maybe their kid is like doing a youth program at the aquarium. These are things that you might want to learn about them, and that'll really humanize the interaction for everybody involved and help them remember that you see them as a person and they'll see you as a person as well. You'll find that common ground.
Hey,
Then
Madeline,
the build, yeah, sure,
can I add one more thing really quick
of
too?
course.
The opening closing by asking their lawmaker about their interest is awesome. I think also always closing with thank you.
Yes.
Representatives and senators, this is a very part-time job. I don't know if you've ever Googled how much money they make. It is very little. We are so grateful for the work that they do. So just always remember to say thank you and be grateful for the fact that they are there representing you.
Awesome. That is such a good addition. Thank you, Jesse. So now moving on to the policy portion, that will be in the middle of your meeting. And again, I just really want to stress, you're not here to be a policy expert. That's not your job. It's helpful for you to know a little bit about the general objective of a bill, maybe have read a one sheet. We provide you with briefing sheets all throughout the AHS week process, so you'll have at least a baseline understanding. But you certainly don't need to know every single little thing, and you don't need to lecture them or prove to them that you know everything about the bill. Rather, we encourage you to prioritize local personal stories. So this could be a heartfelt story of how a cultural program impacted your life, the life of a family member, the lives of your neighbors. And you could also talk about how a bill would impact your organization, your public school, your district as a whole. Sharing stories and really keeping it local and personal is super important. And when you talk about a specific bill, we encourage you to use clear ask language. Usually you'll start with this and then go into a story. You can always reverse those if it makes more sense for you, but this helps you stay on track. So I put a fake bill on here, which would be please vote yes on House Bill XYZQ to support teaching artists. This is not a real bill. Our bills actually have numbers rather than letters, but that's an example of our bill ask language. So you'll just want one sentence. We provide briefing sheets and we'll usually put that sentence on the briefing sheet for you so you know exactly how to phrase it, and then you can go into more of your own way that you want to talk about it. And the last thing I just want to say is that these personal stories can actually make it to the voting floor. Sometimes they'll really resonate with a lawmaker, so much so that when it's time to vote on a bill, they'll actually say, well, I heard from this constituent in Port Townsend that da 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 da, and use that as a compelling reason to get their colleagues to vote yes or no on a bill. These are the things that stick in their mind, not the policy jargon. So really know that this is simple. This is something you can do. You have all the expertise you need from your lived experience. You are the boots on the ground voice that they need to hear. And because they're so busy and there are so many issues to look at, sometimes they don't have that touch point with exactly what's going on for culture workers. So you are providing them with the gift of information of what's happening in our sector. And then that will galvanize them to help us. All right. We're going to move on to our next section. I'm going to stop sharing screen because I believe we have our representative here in the audience. Everyone, please welcome Representative Salahuddin from District 48.
Hello, hello.
Thank you so much for being here. I've pinned you so everyone can see your face.
Great.
And I'm just going to start with a quick question that I did not send you in advance, which is just tell us a little bit about yourself and what makes District 48 in particular unique and special to you.
Absolutely. Well, really quickly to start, why it's special is I was born and raised in the 48th district, and so it's been my home my entire life, and that really ties me to the community. So I'll allude back to why the district is so special, but just a little bit about myself. Again, Osman Salahuddin. I use he/him pronouns, and I am a now first-year legislator in the state legislature. Started at the start of this year. And my background comes by way of the University of Washington, where I studied neuroscience. I was working at the Fred Hutch, as well as the UW Medical Center in the emergency department, and wanted to go to medical school. That was sort of where my educational focus was. But at that time, we had a new president, and unfortunately, a lot of the attacks on community that I was seeing impacted my own community directly. I'm Muslim and South Asian. My mom is visibly Muslim, wears a hijab, and so when the travel ban came about, I saw my own community being affected, and a part of that really tied into why I wanted to get into public service in the first place. My dad's a small business owner. My mom is a special education preschool teacher. And so these holistic life experiences that they've had, but also me growing up here, knew that I wanted to get involved. So I got involved at the university as student body president, and fast forward a little bit, both in service as a city council member in Redmond and now in the legislature. I want to put, my values forward. And, in the 48th, we have a population of over 43% immigrants, over 50% people of color. And there is so much value in what community brings. And so I'm just very blessed to have the opportunity to not only represent the community I grew up in, but represent a community that has been growing in both diversity, but also in number over the past several years.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. That's such a great reason to get into public service and to serve your community.
Thank you.
So first, I'd love to just start by asking you how often you meet with constituents. In a normal week for Representative Salahuddin, how much of that is constituent meetings? How much of that is paperwork? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot. I will just say there's, I can't quantify it on a day-to-day basis just because every day is so different. But during session, I was appointed 6 days before session started and
Wow.
jumped right into the thick of things this year. And I believe some days we had 15 to 20 constituent meetings, each 15 minutes. Sometimes they, went a little bit longer, but I wanted to make sure that I heard from the folks that were, advocating for issues that they cared most about or that resonated with them. And I always prioritized constituents in my district, but I'm a representative for the state of Washington, and I wanted to advocate for voices all across the community. So I rarely declined meetings. Maybe
Wow.
that was my being naive as a first year legislator, also the youngest legislator in the state. And so I really wanted to emphasize meetings with younger folks and youth who historically have not been politically engaged or civically engaged, but a lot of constituent meetings. And even now in the interim, I still take a few meetings a day, maybe several a week.
That's honestly more than I would have expected during the off session. Wow, that's quite a
Yeah.
bit. So that really proves to everyone, as I was saying before you hopped on, that this is representative government. You guys are really focusing on listening to your constituents. So this is, I guess, an expansion of the next question. The core question is, how much of an impact would you say constituent meetings have on your priorities and voting record? But my extension of that is, when you're meeting with so many people, how does that impact kind of shake out when you have to think about 20 different issues during a day in the legislative session? How do you keep track of all of that, and how does that inform how you create your priorities?
Absolutely, it's a great question. I think the for the first part of the question, I think the stories that are shared by constituents are some of the most important things that we can use as legislators and that I use as a tool to really advocate for the points that I care about. I know that one thing that I know for sure is that I don't know everything, and that comes from advocates, that comes from organizations on the ground doing great work, who represent issues, represent real stories. And so, as much as I love data, I'm very data-driven, evidence-based approach, focus on a lot of issues. I know that there's some things that you can't quantify, and I want to take those real-life stories to the votes that I'm taking. So some of the votes this year specific to, for example, getting Eid recognized as a state holiday.
Mm.
That is not quantifiable on the impact that it can make, but when you get so many, Muslim community members who, have not historically resonated with being seen or represented by government, and now they have this tie to what the civic process can bring. I think those stories. We had over 1,000 people sign up to testify
Wow.
for just that one bill. So getting that engagement is really important to me. And now I'm forgetting the second part of your question.
The
Hopefully,
second part was, yeah, how do you keep your priorities straight when you have so many things you
yes,
hear in a
yes.
day?
Uh, I have the priorities that sort of I, based on values, have taken into the legislature, but I think I really derive those from community conversations. So when constituents are meeting with me, a lot of the legislation I put forward, including, support for victims of sexual assault, or a bill that passed this session, or housing advocacy, those are things that I have brought because activists or advocates have brought those issues to me, and I want to serve as a champion for the issues that I care about, and those were included. And so, how impactful it is varies based on the legislator. Varies based on the legislator themselves. But I find for myself. Most of the legislation that I will be putting forward is from community, because otherwise, the issues that we are all elected or appointed to represent. I don't want I don't want to be someone who is not listening to the people who have entrusted me with this position. And so that's definitely where every single day I'm taking those issues and either advocating to my colleagues on an issue and saying, hey, this is what I'm hearing from my constituents, or in the legislation that I put forward, using that as a backbone for it.
Gotcha. That sounds great. Well, it also is a good reminder to all of us to do this work. I'm glad you are all here so that we can know how to make our stories as impactful as possible when we all go to our own lawmakers. So, speaking of impactful meetings, if you can give really quick two stories, one of a great constituent meeting that really stuck with you, and then one of a really rough meeting that didn't go so well. Obviously, don't name any names, don't throw anyone under the bus, but focus more on the tactics of why that rubbed you the wrong way, what not to do in a meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll start with the latter because I can't name one specific example, but it's happened a few times of just folks taking a really long time. And
Mm.
I know that, especially as legislators right now, in the interim, I want to take as long as I have and as long as the other person has, or as long as the other group has, to be able to have a good long conversation. But in session, because we are so structured, we have 15-minute meetings at a time, and there are other groups who are waiting, not just to talk with me, but even to talk with my legislative assistant, to talk with other legislators. The schedule is so tight, and in a legislative session where going into next year, there's only 60 days and everything will have such a tight turnaround. I would say the roughest experiences were when folks um, did not either get to their point and had to try to go over, and then it got rushed, or they just didn't care. Sometimes that
Mhm.
happened, of just not really focused on the time. Some of the most impactful, I will say, the meetings with the youth. I had a meeting
Mhm.
where robot students who had robotics asks came in and presented their entire robotic device that they created in just 10 minutes, and I appreciated the timeline, but also they got to their point, and the student advocates across issues have been some of the best meetings that I've had, because they have so much energy, they have so much hope, and I'm trying to really advocate for that, in that government does have a lot of opportunity to create change, to create opportunities for communities that have not historically been heard. And so when, for example, the Boys and Girls Club came, I sat down to make sure that I could listen to the issues of these constituents, these students who came all the way from my district down to Olympia, understanding that it takes a long time. It's going out of your way and going out of your day's schedule, and it's not the most comfortable environment. But when, especially these youth are putting their ideas forward, those are some of my favorite meetings.
That is so cool to hear. And we're also doing a little bit of youth pilot program this year for AHS Week. So it's great for me to
Perfect.
hear that you love meeting with youth, because we're really trying to build that up over the next few years. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So now I'd love, other than not taking too much time, being really succinct to the point, do you have any other tips for how to approach a state lawmaker during a meeting?
Yeah. I think, I mean, you've done a great job already as an organization of pre-sending information. But if you can send information ahead of time as an organization, so that whether folks accept paper at their offices or not, there is some level of um, pre-knowledge that the legislator might have. So coming prepared, making sure that if there is a bigger group, I personally like to hear from everyone, because it just shows that there's so much more investment and engagement, and then quick introductions at the beginning. So I usually, the legislator, like, I like to ask, hey, could you share where everyone's from, and your name and your involvement with the organization, but just really getting to the point there. But ultimately, going with some context, some pre-information, and then the ask. A clear ask is always helpful. And I will say, sometimes the ask might be funding, which is not always fun, and most of the time it will be funding, because of the tight um, budget that we have right now. But even if it is funding, even if it is resource allocation, we want to know, so that once an opportunity may arise to advocate, it's at the top of our mind. So yeah, clear ask and then closing. You said, I caught the tail end of your presentation saying thank you.
Mhm.
I mean, very much so appreciate it, but I would highlight thanking the legislative assistants as well, because they've put in so much work in organizing and getting the meetings there.
Awesome. That is a great segue to my next couple of questions about the staff. So I know we're
Yes.
limited on time here, so you can make this a quick summary if you'd like.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'd love to know what role they play in your legislative process. And then, if, for example, an advocate were to meet with a staffer
Mhm.
instead of a lawmaker during session, how would that change, for better or for worse, or just for different? How would that change the contents of the meeting and the outcome of the meeting?
Yeah, I think personally for me, I talk with my legislative assistant, Gavin, is incredible. He and I talk twice. We talk all day, but we have two set meetings a day where we cover what's going on in the calendar, and then what recap we might have, and anywhere where I might need to engage or follow up on meetings that he may have taken. I would say, going into a meeting with a staff member or legislative assistant, you should treat it very similarly because they are also a representative of the office. And I think the representation of constituency, they have a really great grasp. Sometimes on some issues, a lot better because they're always, picking up the phone, answering emails. So they know sort of the major issues going on, even outside of talking to the legislator. The staff has almost, if not all, of the information that a legislator may have, at least in my case. And so when going into a meeting, I would really recommend just keeping it very much so the same, um, and adhering to all of the same principles.
Awesome. That's great to hear. And that definitely reflects our approach to Inspire Washington. So anytime you repeat something that we've been telling people, I'm like, yes, we're doing a good job,
Hmm.
which is great. My last
Perfect.
question for you before I turn it over to our audience to ask you questions is what is, from your perspective, on your side of the table, the key ingredient to sustaining a relationship with a constituent or an organization in your district? Because we have our key ingredients for sustaining relationships with you guys, but I'd love to hear what you think is helpful when you keep meeting with the same folks in your district over and over again.
Yeah. First thing, please invite us to community events, whatever's happening in the district or even regionally. We want to be. I won't speak for all of us. I love to be out in community, and my previous job, which is where I connected with Inspire Washington for the first time, was with King County Council member Sarah Perry. I was her communications and community engagement manager. So in that job alone, we had over 200 external meetings out in community, and so I cannot emulate that in this part-time role, but I want to do as much as I can. And so community events, making sure that, during the interim, there's a lot of time, and scheduling some things in the district, whether it's just a coffee chat every few months, sharing your priorities as they continue to evolve and grow. That's going to be the most important thing because what we're seeing, especially with the trickle down from the federal government, things are a lot different now than they were 6 months ago, than they were last year. And we as legislators may not hear about everything that is impacting your priority issues. And so whether it's an email, a phone call to my office, or specifically to Gavin or our staff, that's going to be the most helpful thing, is just staying as engaged on the issues that matter to you as possible.
Awesome. That is great to hear. We definitely encourage the same thing. So it's good that that's a
Perfect.
mutual it's a mutual relationship there. We are always encouraging advocates to invite folks to their community events, coffee
Yes.
chats. We also do, catch up coffee chats during the summer. We'll travel statewide to go meet with different lawmakers. So it sounds like we're all on the same page, which is so great to hear.
Awesome.
All right, I'm going to turn this over to our audience. I don't know how much longer you can stay here, so feel free to maybe let's take 3 questions. Is that
That
enough?
would be great. Yeah, I have a
Great.
few
All right.
minutes, and feel free to share my contact information after the fact. I definitely want to hear from folks.
Will do. Thank you so much. All right. Does anyone have a question for Representative Salahuddin? Oh, I guess we've
Easy.
answered
There we
everyone's
go.
burning questions. Easy. Well, in that case, thank you so much for being here. I'll hand you back 5 extra minutes of your
Perfect.
day. We so appreciate your perspective. And if there are any District 48ers out in the audience, I'm sure they're going to look forward to meeting with you in February during AHS week.
Absolutely. And District 48 again is Redmond, Bellevue, Kirkland, and the Points communities. And even if you're not in the 48th, if you're anywhere in the community, definitely swing by my office. I would say I have the best view. It's right of the Capitol building, and
Ooh,
when the cherry
okay.
blossoms, it won't be during this session, but when the cherry blossoms are there, they're right outside my window. So
Okay,
I'm
tough
biased, but
competition.
it's beautiful. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Take care.
Thank you. I will remove his pin. Awesome. Yeah, well, that was so informative and it's so validating, as I mentioned, to hear that so many of the things that we've been saying to all of you for years just naturally come to mind when the lawmakers say them. So that is absolutely lovely. All right, we're going to jump back into our PowerPoint here. Give me 1 second to get my screen all set up. And Jesse, if you can pull up the AHS Week sign up list while I do that, that would be awesome. Oh, took me back to the beginning. All right, so we've talked a lot about how to talk to a lawmaker, and now it's time for you to sign up so that you can actually do that. The first thing I need you to do, if you have not done so already, is to sign up for AHS Week 2026. I also just want to throw out there that we are still seeking lots of district leaders and a handful of regional captains. District leaders, most of the positions are open, so go ahead and just indicate that on your form. If you happen to be from a district that is already filled, I'll let you know, but thanks so much for showing your support. We'll find some way for you to be involved, but most of the districts are open. So if you want a little bit of extra leadership, that is an option. If you're not sure what that means, we covered that in our September webinar. There is a link on our YouTube. I'll make sure everyone gets access to that. And then our regional captains, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in a second. We're seeking a handful more of those. So we have 3 regions that do not have a captain yet out of our 12. That's Southwest Washington, so roughly greater Vancouver area, South Sound, which is Thurston and Mason counties, and the Peninsula. We need captains for those 3 regions. So if you are in one of those regions and you want to take on a little bit of a stronger leadership role as a volunteer this year, you can indicate that on your form and I'll reach out to you. And we also need co-captains in 2 areas. So we have 1 captain already in place, but these are slightly larger regions where we know that there's going to need some extra support. So the east side of King County, all the way from Snoqualmie up to Woodinville, all the way over to Bellevue, that whole area needs a second person to join Christy Lake, who I believe is on this call from the Snoqualmie Valley Museum.
Yes,
So if
please
you are
join
from
me.
the
It's
east
lots
side,
of fun.
yes, and Christy's great. You'll love working with her. So join Christy. And then for Eastern Washington, we have Karen Mobley in place as one of our, that's roughly the Spokane Valley, but also the Palouse, that's that region. So if you're from any of those districts and you want to join Karen, we're looking for a regional captain there. I believe Miranda, our district leader in Spokane, is also on this call. So it'll be a really fun time joining that team. So go ahead and sign up if you want to join them. And then our
Hey,
next thing, if
hey,
you don't want any
Madeline.
leadership, yeah.
Oh, there's a quick question in the chat that I'll read
Oh,
it.
sure.
You probably can't see it because you're sharing screen.
I sure cannot.
Miranda asks, what is the limit for participants in each region? And if we're lucky enough to exceed that limit, what else can we do to engage those folks and help them feel heard?
Oh, that is an excellent question. So the short answer is there is no limit. We are getting some really big teams these days, specifically in Seattle, Tacoma, and Olympia. So what I am doing rather than to cap things is to just expand. So we're hoping that depending on how signups go, we'll be able to split it up by cultural discipline. So for example, in Seattle, I imagine we'll have a Seattle arts meeting and then a Seattle heritage and science meeting. That way the numbers can kind of shake out, everyone can get a turn to talk. So the same thing will happen in your region if it gets really large. So recruit as many folks as you can, and if we get a really giant team, that is the way that we will break things up so that everyone can get their meeting. I don't think the legislature will sneeze at that if you're focusing on heritage in one meeting and science in another meeting. You know, those are different issues, so they will still take the time to talk to us all. And that also brings me to my next point, which is telling your friends and colleagues to join you. This is something all of you should be able to do. Even if you're not interested in leadership, being a captain, no worries. We all have stuff going on in our lives, but it takes 2 seconds to tell other people to join you at AHS Week. So share this with your colleagues, your family, your friends, send them the sign-up sheet, send them the links to the webinars. You can use what you learned in the webinars to prepare them. This is a great way for us to grow our coalition and keep showing the lawmakers that we are a united front that really cares about the cultural sector. All right, so this next part of the webinar is our cool down section. And I just wanted to let anyone know who is a returner who's done this many times, if you feel like you have a meeting that you really need to run to, if you have to hop off early, this is okay. I don't think you'll miss anything super duper crucial. But if you're new or you've only done this once, I highly encourage you to stay for the full section. And also you can stay the whole time, even if you are a returner and you don't have anywhere to be. This is great. So I just want to touch base on legislative districts. We talked a lot about how Representative Salahuddin is from the 48th district. And if you're new, you might be like, I don't, 48, sure, I don't know what that is. What does that mean? So let's just break that down a little bit. So a legislative district is different from a congressional district, and here is the distinction. We have 49 districts, as you can see on this map, in the state of Washington, and every single one of those districts gets 2 representatives and 1 senator. Those lawmakers represent our state's version of what you think of when you think of Congress in DC. So we have the House and the Senate. These are the 2 chambers of the legislative branch. So they are making and passing laws. Now, some people get confused when they sign up because congressional districts look different. We have, for our DC, our federal folks, we have 10 districts congressional districts in Washington, and that map looks nothing like this map that is on the screen right now. And our senators represent the full state. That is different from the state level. On the state level, every district gets its own one senator rather than the whole state being represented by two senators. So every single district is going to have their two reps and their one senator, which is not the same thing as your congressional rep. So forget about your number in DC, forget about all of that. You're somewhere on 1 through 49. And like I've talked about before, this is representative government. So we're really trying to talk to the lawmakers about what the constituents need. They're voting based on the people within that district, what their needs are, and not necessarily what they believe should be happening, ideally at least. Now let's talk about our AHS Week regions. So you're going to obviously meet with your lawmaker. You have 3 lawmakers. You're going to meet with each one for 15 minutes, and you got a pretty good sense of what that meeting will look like after hearing from Representative Salahuddin. You'll also meet your fellow advocates from your region, from your district. We're going to join in on that meeting. You will also interact with a district leader who handles scheduling and meeting prep. So you'll join some Zoom meetings with them to prep for your meeting, talk through those talking points, that opening, middle, and closing that we talked about, your personal stories that you want to share, making sure we're really keeping to a good drumbeat, watching the time so that we are respectful, mindful of the lawmakers' time, and can maximize our impact. And then you'll also interact with a regional captain. So the regional captain oversees your district and 2 to 4 other neighboring districts. We break it down into 12 regions throughout the state. And I have some maps where I'm going to show you guys what those regions are and what that all looks like. So that person basically serves as a communications liaison between me, the outreach coordinator, and your district leader and your fellow advocates on your team. So they can kind of help be a buffer, because I have 49 districts to manage. That's way too much work for little old me. So it's really helpful to have these many advocates step up to volunteer and also really speak to the needs of your region. So one thing that you'll talk through as your team is regional talking points. You'll really get in the weeds of what is unique to your region. Maybe your city, your town, your county, your districts focus on a specific area of culture. You could be a hub for science or a hub for literature, and that could make your area different from the others, and that will then make the requests that you put forth different. If you're in a more rural area of Washington state, you might be asking for better access for arts education that is uneven based on what they have in King County areas. These are all things that are really going to depend on where you are and also where your lawmakers are coming to this conversation. I've neglected to mention this before, but I figured I should bring it up, which is that we are a nonpartisan organization, so we welcome cultural advocates, cultural supporters, regardless of political affiliation. That also means, though, that we're talking to partisan lawmakers. So regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, you might have a meeting with a lawmaker who you personally disagree with on a lot of different issues. And finding that common ground, finding those local stories is a great way for you to set all of that tension aside and to talk about what really matters for this particular meeting, which is to talk about the power of culture, cultural support, fighting for what you believe in, and how that will impact all constituents regardless of their political affiliation. So some folks might completely agree with their lawmaker, and in other districts it might be a little bit more likely that you'll have some disagreements. So that's just a good thing to talk out and understand as a team in a nonpartisan and kind way. All right, so now let's look at our advocacy regions. First, this map shows you, oh no, my words got all screwed up by PowerPoint. Sorry about that. This map shows you the non-I-5 corridor regions. The next slide will cover the I-5 corridor because I had to blow that up so you can see all the districts because they're smaller. So this first region is the Northwest region. So that's northern Snohomish County, also Whatcom, Skagit County in the San Juan Islands, our Bellingham area. Then we have our peninsula, which is obviously the peninsula, but also includes Bremerton and Kitsap County, that whole area. Even Gig Harbor has made it into this district just for the sake of keeping things fair. You'll notice as we talk through these regions that some of them are more so, it might be split between counties, and we just had to make a decision to make sure that the workload was even and fair for all of our captains, but there's enough regional common ground that it makes sense. South Sound is a great example of that. We have Olympia. We also have Mason County over here. And then District 2 is largely in Pierce County, but it's still in Thurston County, so we do put it in that region. Southwest includes our coastal areas, but also the greater Vancouver area. Then moving over here, this is South Central. This includes the Tri-Cities and Walla Walla and Yakima. Then we have Eastern Washington, which is our Spokane area, but also the Palouse. This is North and Central and Northeast, sorry. So it's essentially our North Cascades area, all the way from Chewelah over to Wenatchee and Ellensburg and Leavenworth. Oh yeah, I got through all of them on this slide. And our next one, this is our I-5 corridor. So we have Snohomish County, so that's districts 1, 21, 32, 38, and 44. 1 and 32 are split between King and Snohomish. So if you are a shoreline or a Bothell person and you happen to live in the King County portion of Bothell, or you're in shoreline, you're going to get lumped in with the Snohomish County folks. But still, we find enough commonality that it all makes sense and everyone's happy to be there. Then we have our Seattle districts, which are pretty self-explanatory, but that also includes Vashon, so districts 34, 36, 37, 43, and 46. Then we have South King County, so that includes South Seattle, but also Renton, Kent, Auburn, Federal Way, etc. That's 11, 30, 33, and 47. Then we have our East King County region, the east side, again, all the way out here in Snoqualmie and Issaquah, but also all the way up to Redmond and Woodinville. So this is my region. I'm from District 41, so that's District 5, 41, 45, and 48. And then our last one is Pierce County. So Tacoma is District 27, and then our other districts in this region are 25, 28, 29, and 31. So all the way from Lakewood to Bonnie Lake. All right, that's the webinar. Thanks so much for being here. I'm glad to give you an extra 12 minutes back for your day. If anyone has any questions, I'm going to stop the Zoom recording first, but then feel free to stick on and ask any questions that you might have. If not, we'll have a webinar in November. We'll announce the information soon, and we'll have a recording that you can share with folks to get involved. But we hope to see you at AHS Week, and I hope that this is an informative way for you to learn how to talk to your lawmaker and kind of bring those barriers down to see that it's really easy and it's just a simple human-to-human interaction.